There's a saying hunters know well. One day you're the hunter, the next you're the hunted. Most go their entire lives without ever seeing that second day, but some do. Experienced men in familiar terrain, with the right gear and years of practice. Men who did everything by the book, who had been in that exact situation dozens of times before. And yet, there came a moment when the animal stopped running, when the distance closed far too fast, when the environment they thought they controlled turned against them. These are the cases where the trigger was pulled for the last time. Asher Watkins. On August 3, 2025, Asher Watkins, a millionaire and hunting enthusiast, was tracking an African buffalo in the Bambasana concession in Limpopo, accompanied by a professional hunter and a tracker. The vegetation was dense, visibility was short, the kind of low, closed brush that forces a group to walk in single file and rely on the tracker to know what lies ahead. The operation followed the standard protocol: locate, approach, shoot. The tracker went first, the group took position. The buffalo was ahead, standing still, within range. Watkins raised his rifle, settled his aim, and held his breath. Everything suggested the hunt was about to end the way it was supposed to. The problem began when the first shot did not bring the animal down. What happens after a shot fails to kill an African buffalo is well documented by those who survive to tell it. The animal does not flee in a straight line. It disappears into the brush, stops, and waits. The buffalo's physical build amplifies that behavior. A short neck, a low head, and horns that form a continuous bony shield across the forehead. It does not need momentum to injure. It needs zero distance. And in that kind of terrain, zero distance arrives before any reaction is possible. The buffalo turned and charged. Nearly 2,000 pounds of force aimed straight at Watkins, who had no time to react. Watkins was thrown violently to the ground and the professional hunter killed the animal, but the contact had already been fatal. Safari operator Hans Vermaak described the attack as sudden and unprovoked. Limpopo's provincial environmental authority reported that the first shot had failed to stop the animal. The two versions do not completely contradict each other, but they leave a gap worth noting. The exact moment when a buffalo stops being prey and becomes the hunter is still debated by those who were there. Watkins was the client, not the professional. That matters because he was the one holding the rifle when the first shot was fired. And it was that first shot that changed everything. He entered that brush as a paying customer seeking an experience. He came out as another statistic of an animal African hunters call the equalizer. Mark Uptain. If Watkins was the client, Mark Uptain was the professional. Uptain was 37 years old and worked as a hunting guide in the Teton Wilderness region of Wyoming. In 2018, he was in the field with a client when they killed an elk. What came next was the most dangerous part of hunting and the least glamorous: skinning and preparing the carcass in thick timber. The two men were crouched down, knives in hand, with blood on the ground and in the air. The forest around them was dense enough to hide a grizzly from less than 30 yards away. It was the most vulnerable position possible. The bear caught the scent of the carcass and moved in through the cover of the woods. By the time it entered their field of vision, it was already charging. No vocalization, no snapping branches, no time to stand up. Teton County Undersheriff Matt Carr described the attack as very aggressive and said there was no time to react. A grizzly does not attack because it is hungry for humans. It attacks because it reads the scene as a resource conflict. An opened carcass, two humans crouched over it, no visual awareness of the surroundings. To the bear, that was not an ambush. It was a territorial correction. And a grizzly at full speed can cover about 30 feet in under a second. The client managed to escape with injuries. Uptain did not. His body was found the next day, around 1:15 p.m. after search efforts that had begun at 6:30 a.m. The preliminary report pointed to trauma to the head and chest. The later investigation by the State Wildlife Agency revealed details that added more layers to the case. An empty can of bear spray was found at the scene, with the safety removed, indicating that it had been used. The evidence suggested the spray interrupted part of the attack, but not in time to save the guide. The bears later captured, a sow and a cub, had moved on to the elk carcass afterward. The question raised by the investigation is not whether Uptain made a mistake. It is that he may have done everything right, and it still was not enough. Theunis Botha. Theunis Botha was not just experienced. He was the kind of hunter other hunters looked to as a reference. On May 19, 2017, he was leading a group on a property in Gwayi, near the Hwanghae region, when they encountered a breeding herd of elephants. The terrain was open enough to see the animals, but that is not necessarily an advantage. With elephants, visible distance and safe distance are two very different things. Breeding herds, made up mostly of females and calves, are considered more unpredictable than solitary bulls. 3 females charged the group. Botha placed himself between the group and the animals, firing into the air in an attempt to push the herd back while keeping the others behind him. But something unexpected happened. A 4th elephant was approaching from the flank, fast, without anyone tracking the movement in time. Before Botha could react, she wrapped him with her trunk and lifted him off the ground. One of the other hunters fired at the female. The shot was accurate. The problem is that when an elephant weighing several thousand pounds collapses, it does not choose where it falls. The elephant dropped on top of Botha, eliminating any chance of survival. What makes an elephant especially lethal in this kind of situation is not just its weight. It is the combination of intelligence, memory, and coordinated response within the herd. While 3 females held the group's attention, the 4th closed in from the flank. Botha was managing the visible threat. The invisible threat came from the side. What sets Botha's case apart from the previous 2 is the geometry of the accident. It was not a direct charge, an ambush, or a wounded animal fleeing. It was the collapse of a downed animal. The shot that was supposed to end the danger created the final danger. Botha was killed by the solution, not the problem. Scott Van Zyl. The other 3 cases have an identifiable moment. The instant of the attack. Scott Van Zyl's case does not. It has a disappearance. On April 7, 2017, Scott Van Zyl set out on an expedition along the banks of the Limpopo River in the Chikwarakwara area near Baitbridge. By the following day, he had still not returned. Van Zyl was 44 years old, a South African professional hunter who regularly operated in that border region between Zimbabwe and South Africa. That was when Toki van der Merwe activated the search network. What the teams found on the riverbank were tracks and personal belongings, then signs of crocodiles. In that region, the Limpopo River has low banks, vegetation that reaches the water, and stretches where visibility below the surface is almost zero. The Nile crocodile does not need speed on land because it rarely operates there. It waits on the line between the visible and the invisible in the narrow band where the bank meets the water. The attack lasts less than a second. There is no warning, no threat display, no sound. That is why the crocodile has one of the most consistent records of killing humans who know the environment well. The danger does not look like danger until it is too late. The most likely scenario is that Van Zyl was standing near the water at some point during the expedition, only a few steps from the bank, and that one of the crocodiles already had him in its field of perception long before he noticed anything at all. A movement, a shadow, and the grab happened before any reaction was possible. For days, helicopters flew over the area, divers operated in the river, and Zimbabwean authorities, together with South African police, requested authorization to kill the crocodiles. The authorization was granted. The animals were killed, and their stomach contents were collected for DNA analysis. On April 20th, 2017, the test confirmed it. The remains that had been found were Scott Van Zyl's. Press reports varied on whether 2 or 3 crocodiles were killed and on exactly where the remains were located. But the backbone of the case remains the same: disappearance, search, authorized kill, DNA. Of the 4 cases, it is the only one in which no one ever witnessed the moment itself. No account, no possible reconstruction. Only what came before and what came after. If this kind of story pulls you in, the next video is already on your screen.